I'm Kieran, this is ShelleyDuvallScream, and this week I'll be talking about the movie 28 Days Later. 28 Days Later was written by Alex Garland and directed by Danny Boyle. I'll be honest, I hadn't seen this movie until I announced last week that I was going to do a review for it. I wasn't too sure what to expect going into it, and the only thing I really knew was that it was a zombie movie without traditional zombies. The zombies in 28 Days Later aren't the undead, they're the infected. The infection comes from a virus of sorts spread through blood. It's a rage virus, which kind of makes people act like zombies. They lose their inhibitions and attack others. When I was watching this movie, though it is distinctly horror, it doesn't feel like a horror movie. It feels like any kind of other film. It's got a very similar feel to Trainspotting, which is one of Danny Boyle's most famous films. Though this movie is about a zombie apocalypse, it's also really about the way that people relate to each other, the way that they need each other, and the way that having people with you inspires hope. The movie has a cold opening where we learn about the rage virus through studies being done on monkeys. We see patient 0 get infected, and we also see the very beginning of the spread of the disease. Then, we jump 28 days into the future where we find Cillian Murphy alone, naked, in a hospital bed. Murphy's character, Jim, has been in a coma and has no idea what's going on. He wakes up alone, very confused, and he wanders through the hospital. Once he leaves the hospital, he ends up in the streets of London. These first shots of Jim wandering the streets of London are some of the most effective in the film. It's completely empty in an environment you usually see bustling with tourists and just people. The first people he encounters are infected, but he has no idea what's going on. Shortly after, he's saved by two people who turn out to be Selena and Mark. Selena, Naomi Harris's character, is really one of the most interesting in the film. When we first meet her, she's aggressive. She's willing to do anything to survive, and her entire philosophy on the matter is that survival is all that's important. Later, when Jim and Selena are on their own, we meet Frank and his daughter Hannah. These two are a sharp contrast to Mark and Selena, who believe that survival is as good as it gets, and that you shouldn't make connections to anyone, you just gotta fight for yourself. As a father and daughter pair, they really know that all they have is each other, and that that's all that's important. After hearing a radio broadcast, the four of them decide to set out to try to find this fort in Manchester, who claim to have the answer to infection. They drive Frank's old cab across the country, they encounter the infected, and they see the entire city of Manchester burning. This sequence of the film, though it does definitely include those horror aspects, and we see the infected and they have to fight for their lives, it's really about the growing bond between the four of them. As before, Jim and Selena were only in it for survival, or at least Selena definitely was. They spend more time with this father and daughter, and they become a part of this group. And Selena especially really starts to realize that maybe survival isn't as good as it gets. All of this is really cemented by the way that Selena starts taking care of Hannah, kind of as a mother figure. Once they make it to the compound and they meet the soldiers who sent out this broadcast that they had the answer, we see a different side of the survivalist movement. Major Henry West, played by Christopher Eccleston, is a really stark contrast to Frank, especially. At their first dinner at the compound, Major Henry makes a speech where he says that the things he's seen in the 4 weeks since infection is people killing people. And that is the same thing he's seen the 4 weeks before the infection, the 4 weeks before that. While West has heralded himself as sort of a savior, claiming to have the answer to infection, it turns out he's a much more sinister character. Each group of survivors that we meet in this movie has a different understanding of what surviving means. From Selena and Mark, who believe that survival is as good as it gets, to Frank and Hannah, who know that family and having someone to look after you and to look after is the most important, and the soldiers who believe that the only hope is rebuilding. I want to talk a little bit about what makes this movie scary, and it's really this idea of people killing people. First of all, the effects and the makeup used on the infected are pretty great. There's this horrifying jerking movement that they all do, and there's this sound, kind of a guttural screech. I don't know exactly what it is. But it's really inhuman. It's especially amazing to see in a couple different scenes, specifically with Patient 0, that transition from humanity to infected. There's also this feeling when we wake up in the hospital with Jim, where we know what happened previously, but like Jim, we have no idea what's going on outside. A really wonderful part about the scenes where Jim is wandering around London is the silence. Music does come in, but it's left out long enough that we feel the emptiness and kind of the hollowness of everything. Your fear also builds as you grow attached to these characters. This is mostly true of Jim and Selena and Frank and Hannah. As they grow closer to each other, it becomes more important to the viewer that they stay together and that they all survive this. I think the scariest thing about this rage virus, and it's something definitely paralleled in the soldiers at the end, is the fact that what we fear, what these creatures are, is the capability of man. I think the scariest monsters are really ones that make us question ourselves, and this idea of rage as a virus, and rage as something that turns you into a zombie, is really interesting. It's a lot more complex than your traditional zombie, and I think that it makes it almost more frightening. From here on out, there might be some spoilers, so if you haven't seen the movie yet and you don't want to know, now's the time to stop watching. I really want to talk about the love story between Jim and Selena, because it kind of makes me angry. I understand that there's this whole concept in the film of love and connection is what's important and it's what gets you through, but at the same time, I don't think it's necessary. It's one of those things that people love a good love story, but I feel like the connection of family and that feeling of responsibility could have been there without the love story. That's a personal opinion. That's just how I am. I also want to talk about the ending and alternative endings that Garland and Boyle had contemplated. So if you've seen the movie, you know how it ends, obviously. We end up another 28 days later. Jim has been shot, but he survived. Selena and Hannah were somehow able to save him in some abandoned hospital somewhere. And they're all together trying to flag down this plane that buzzes over so that they can be rescued. Originally, the ending that Boyle and Garland had intended, Jim dies. It's kind of a full circle journey for the character. He wakes up in a hospital, goes through all of this, and then dies in a hospital. The ending was changed because audiences thought it was too bleak, and they felt when Selena and Hannah walked out of the hospital alone that they were walking off to certain death. Apparently, women can't fend for themselves, and if the man who's protecting them dies, they're screwed. I think the bond between Selena and Hannah was really an incredible part of this movie, and that the two of them having only each other in the end would have been fine for me. Especially because you get this idea that Selena will do anything to protect Hannah. She sees her almost as her daughter now, and really wants to take care of her. I, for one, believe 100% that Selena could have gotten herself and Hannah through this. Absolutely. However, people wanted an ending with hope, and they got one. I think the ending's still pretty good. It's a little improbable that they would have been able to stitch up Jim's gunshot, but the fact that they all make it through together, when that's what's been so important to them this entire time, it is a nice, happy ending. Overall, I wasn't sure what to expect when I got into this movie, but I ended up really liking it, and I think that you will too. Thanks so much for watching again. Be sure to come back next week when I'll be talking about the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Bye.